You're listening to Rep Radio. Our goal is simple. We support, promote, engage, and inspire the arts community by igniting the ghost light that shines on the stages of the up-and-coming, the unsung heroes, the brilliant writers, and the dynamic designers. Our podcast breaks the fourth wall to give you an inside look at the plays and the players. Stay tuned. Rep Radio is on the air. Today on the podcast, Mariangela Saavedra stops by to talk about the hybrid performance of Rogues Gallery by John Patrick Shanley, presented as part of Fringe Arts by the Stagecrafters Theater. Here is my interview with Mariangela Saavedra. Welcome to Rep Radio. I'm your host, Darnell Radford, and today I'm in the virtual studio with Mariangela Saavedra. And we are here to talk about the Fringe offering, Rogues Gallery by John Patrick Shanley. So, Mariangela, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me back. It is my pleasure to be here. I appreciate it so much.
I had to think about, how long it's been since we've chatted, but the last time we chatted was a Fringe show. So it's only fitting to come back for Fringe. And I think we'll give ourselves a little bit of an excuse because of this long intermission that we've had for not being in a chat space like this. But how have you been?
I've been good. Yeah. The last time we chatted was for a Fringe show, my company's first Fringe show. It was our Fringe debut, if you will. And this time I'm doing a Fringe show for another company, which is exciting to not, be self-producing it. I think last time we chatted, I was, the whole kit and caboodle. And so this time it's nice to just be like, I'm directing this really fun show which is actually a Fringe debut for this company. This company has never done Fringe before. And I said, we had this long intermission, like you mentioned, and I said, what better time to come back than come back and be a part of the Fringe? Like, show them who you are, what you got.
Yeah. And it's like, it is the official start of our theater season. And I thought it was great to see a large list of theater-based offerings in Fringe Arts. I was very happy to see that, because the one thing we know is that theater artists, even though we were all participating in this intermission, we were not void of ideas. We continued to flex our muscles. We continued to figure out how we could apply these skills to other things to keep afloat. And at the first opportunity to get back on a stage, we seized that moment. So it was great to see such a great list at Fringe Arts for 2021.
Yeah, I agree. I'm excited. I wish I had more time to see more things, but I'm going to try and see as much as I can.
So we'll get into Rogues Gallery, but tell us about the summer. What has it been like for you up to this point, getting here?
Well, it's been interesting. We did a lot of actual virtual rehearsing. So I started rehearsals virtually because I thought, you know what? We've got that. We're used to that now. I can do table work, like intense table work, which is wonderful, without having to make people travel for it. So that was a nice use of a tool that we're forced to use. And this time I was like, I'm choosing to use it because I can. And so it was a lot of, preparing and planning like that. But outside of that, it's been, trying to squeeze in some relaxing time to, because as you know, as you mentioned, this is the start of our theater season. So it's like, try to squeeze in as much R&R as you can before everything gets going really busy. I did a little bit of traveling, just, to Virginia, rural Virginia, to visit family and things, but it was nice to get around.
Great. I'm glad that everybody had gotten a chance to sort of get out and we weren't just sitting in and waiting. And I think nature got a lot more attention from us all now because it was so much. It made much more sense for us to be out amongst uh, the greenery than being stuck inside. And I think it's kind of interesting. I want to talk to everyone about this whole time. How long were you holed up inside before you realize, wait, I can go outside? It's not like I can't go outside. Or you look at your backyard and say, it's time to spruce this thing up a little bit and make it more presentable.
That's that's really the thing. So I do have a backyard that's a pretty nice one, just as far as space goes. Not much in it, it's just a yard. But yeah, that was the first thing where I said, you know what? We need to like get a new patio put in here and we need to like really like use the yard because that yard saved my life. I spent probably the last year and a half in my yard. Um,
Hmm.
and it was a place where I could invite a friend or two over to sit outside and don't get me started about outdoor dining. I love outdoor dining. We outdoor dine all the time.
Yeah.
I don't know why we weren't doing that before. And now I'm, disappointed when I go somewhere and they're like, "Oh, we were not opening the outdoor dining today because staffing is an issue." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm
Uh,
depressed about that because I love outdoor dining." But yeah, you're right that it took, a week or two before it was like, "Oh, wait, walks can happen and my yard is right here and I can be outside." And then yeah, I have a very strong appreciation of nature that I didn't have 2 years ago. And I'm thankful for that. I think that's a wonderful blessing. Like a little
yeah.
nice, something a change in my lifestyle that I didn't have before and I'm here for it.
I was actually hoping that some streets would close for good and we would be able to reclaim them, but no such luck.
Someday.
So it goes. Okay. So Fringe Arts 2021 Rogues Gallery, go.
So, I'm doing this show with the Stagecrafters Theater. I don't know if you know who they are. They're a small
Mhm,
theater up in Chestnut Hill. And by small, I just mean physically the building is cozy.
mhm.
They themselves have been around for a very long time,
Yeah.
and they do really great theater for many years. And I've been so privileged to be asked to direct for them. They wanted to do something to start their season, but they wanted something that could be a little different, something easier to put up since they had been on an intermission for a long time. And I belong to the dramatists like play club. Like every quarter, they send me 7 new plays. Well, no, they send me 4 new plays, and the other 3 are like older plays that they want me to have. But I get seven
Mm,
plays every quarter, and Rogues Gallery happened to be in it. And I looked at it and I said, wow, it was written in 2020 and it was written to be done on Zoom. Like he wrote it to be like, hey, you can stare at the camera and do these monologues. And I read them and they were just fascinating and so interesting. And then and then the notes, the playwright's notes, he talked about how it could also be done on stage. And I like when we return to the stage, this can be staged. So when they came to me and said, do you have any ideas, any thoughts, like what we could possibly do for the start of the season? I said, I think you should take a look at this play, Rogues Gallery. I think this would really fit what you're looking to do. And then I said, because you've been in the hiatus for, a year and a half, I think maybe this would be a good opportunity to do fringe. And this is definitely a fringe piece. It's
mm.
very different like that. Um, and they were like, oh, well, is that hard? Like, what's involved? And I said, oh, I've done this a few times. Let me tell you about it. And I sold them on it. And they were like, let's do it. We're doing fringe. So yeah, it's I like the tagline, everybody has a story to tell, because that's really what it is. It's 10 stories. Each character has a story to tell, and they're, darkly comedic, a lot of them. Some of them are, more serious than you think. Some of them take twists that you don't see coming, which I love. On average, most of them are about 5 to 7 minutes long. There's a couple that
Mm.
are a little longer, but it's, one of my favorite things, I call it short attention span theater.
Yeah.
So this is definitely fits there. Um, we decided because you could do it both ways to do it both ways. So you can stream the show. So I'm filming it. I'm actually filming some of them tonight, uh, so that there'll be a version that you can watch virtually, but then you can also come and see it on the stage. And that to me was this great challenge because it's two totally different mediums. And I'm familiar with both of them. I've directed short films before and I've directed for the stage. So it was neat to be able to wear both hats in this circumstance, but I also wanted to capture something virtually that we hadn't seen during this pandemic. I did not want Zoom theater, right? I didn't want to like be like, okay, everybody stare into your webcam and let's record these. So I've taken each actor and filmed them in a location I think appropriate to their character.
Mm,
Um, one character is outside a laundromat, and one character is she's holed up in her house, so I'm filming her in the closet. And there's because I don't think people will expect that when they get the virtual version. I think they're going to think I'm going to watch actors looking at their webcams doing what they've been doing this whole time, and I think it'll be a nice, delightful surprise.
yeah.
uh, Go ahead.
I think I think as as we experience more virtual theater, we will get so many more brilliant ideas because there were so many great virtual performances that happened this year, and every single one of them had something so unique to them that it was like it wasn't just the camera hit record and there it was like they were really thinking about like how do we how do we sort of blend this camera into the space, and not make it clear that this camera is on a tripod, and lighting shining directly at the talent, where we saw some things were with phones, and smaller cameras and like uh, security camera kind of things and point of view things. These were a lot of things we weren't even thinking about before. And once you see the from those perspectives, you're like, wow, this does feel like I'm sitting third row, third seat, because that's where they position the camera for this moment, or being right outside in site specific, which is very fringe. Those are the things I always appreciate. I always think that's great. And I'm always wondering why we can't do that throughout the year. It always seems like we concentrate all of that for the fringe, and we don't really think about being that creative unless we absolutely have to throughout the rest of the year.
I agree. I am a fan of theater outside the box. It's one of the big things that my father and I didn't agree on. So my father was an actor and a director. I learned everything I know pretty much from him up until I got into theater in high school, and then I learned everything else I know from my wonderful theater educators. But as I got older and started doing more theater and directing things and doing stuff, my father and I never quite saw eye to eye on that because I love to take older theater and just flip it on its head and do something like completely unique and different. And my father
Hmm.
was a theater purist. And he was like, no, these shows are done this way. This is the way the playwright wrote them. This is the way they should be done. And I said, yeah, but think about this. Like, how many different ways have we done Shakespeare, right? Okay, so Shakespeare
Hmm.
wrote them in his time to be done that way. But if we did them the same way all the time, which sometimes there's value in that, I'm not saying doing classical Shakespeare is bad, definitely. But I also think flipping it on its head and doing something really unique and creative with it is just, I feel like that is the biggest compliment to a playwright, right? You want to take his work and really like take it to the next level or do something different and unique or bring your vision and voice to it, with this person's words. Like, I think it's great. My dad always was like, "Oh, what are you gonna do to this play now?" Like, I'd say, "I'm doing this show," and then he'd be like, "Okay, what's the catch? What are you," but I think he respected what I did for sure. He just was not necessarily a fan.
I think it's interesting that he said that because he knows you're going to put a spin on it. So at least he expected you to put it through your lens,
Mhm.
and so that's a great thought. It's just like you said, he's a purist. Uh, Why? Well, I mean, I have my own thoughts, but why do you think people are such purists about things? Um, it's 2021, so I mean, if there was a time where we thought we were going to be in hover cars by now, and we're not in hover cars, but we were optimistic about that potentially being part of our future. Or some of the things we didn't expect to have phones in our pockets. Every single one of us has its own phone with a dedicated phone number. Like, these weren't things we were supposed to have, but we have them and we're okay with that.
Yeah, and I think for him, it's like it was the legacy of theater, the art of theater, the history. My father is a great historian. That was definitely, and he was an educator himself. He's an English teacher, so he took those things very seriously. And I think to him, when a play is written, right, it's a snapshot of time, and he
Mhm.
wants to be very pure and holding to that because he's like, this play was written in this snapshot in time, and that's the way we should do this. Whereas if you modernize it or if you put your spin on it like I do, suddenly you've taken it out of that time and you've put it into, present, which I think it was a generational gap situation for him too.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm so much younger and I came from, I guess technically I'm Gen X. So just dated myself. But we were always trying to push that envelope, right? And be like, it's okay to like, bring things to the future. Um, my father passed away in 2006. I think if he were alive now, I think he might have a different opinion. I like
Mm.
to think seeing the way that we have, you know, really sort of how the art form has changed just in the 15 years since he's been gone. I'm like, I think he really would be quite amazed and pleased with it. I think for him, he was worried that the art form was dying and that if you didn't preserve it purely and in its true form, that suddenly we'd lose something. And I think it's very obvious now that that's not what's happening.
Yeah. And I also think people would start to feel like they are actually trapped in a box if they had to, conform to such, um, you know, just a particular thought process. It wouldn't make a difference for. It wouldn't matter to us which director directed the show if they couldn't imagine it in a way that was different. And also the way that we all look at it is, you might be approaching this play from its front door, and I might be approaching this play from the attic window that is, letting in some unexpected ventilation, that might allow us to think about some other part that was secondary when it was written and is more prevalent today. So, you know I think it's so interesting to hear that, but I think I I hear, the purism about theater, and I say, okay, let's move this into a theater and let's have a nice long talk back about it, because I think it just allows people to say, and that is why we love theater. We have purists, and we have imagination, and we have endless amounts of creativity. And once we merge all of that together, we're paying homage to all of it at the same time. We're respecting that tradition, but we're also embracing this new, and we're making space for other points of view. So, yeah,
I
I
I, I
all
agree.
great.
Fully agree with all of that. One thing I did find very interesting that I discovered through this process of, doing virtual theater, um, there were a lot of playwrights who would not give virtual rights to their shows, which I
Mm,
found really fascinating. And I do understand why, where they're like, I wrote this for a stage and that makes sense. And so that's what I think happened when playwrights then, like John Patrick Shanley, started writing shows for the medium, where they were like,
mm,
okay, you know what? Then let's embrace this, because that wasn't the only show I got in that box that was written for to be done on Zoom. There was another one called Waiting for the Host that was the same, written, in 2020, and I thought that was really interesting. Where it was like, okay, and I, I'm not a playwright myself, but I can fully respect when you write something for a certain medium to be like, I didn't write this for a screen.
That's such a Zoom-esque title.
Right. Oh, yeah, waiting for the
Waiting for the host, because on the one hand, you think, dinner guest?
host.
Host of a party? No, this is the host, the meeting host.
Yeah, yeah, no, and it's a fun little piece. The big challenge that I'm finding with this is that, translating it from the medium, for film, like, as he sort of wrote it, to the stage was actually a little bit more challenging than I thought it was going to be. I mean, it's monologues, right? You think, like, how hard can that be? But we wanna watch it, right? So there's blocking involved, you've got to engage, and then what do we use for the stage? What room are these people in? These people are each in their own different space, and I didn't wanna black box the stage, for a couple reasons. The Stagecrafters have a set on the stage that they wanna keep on there because 'cause they're gonna use it, for their next show. So, I had to kind of figure out how to manipulate that set and make it work for what I needed, and then also
Mm,
give the actors room to walk into the space and create it as the space that they need it to be for them and their monologue. And that wasn't something I had predicted. That wasn't something, when I was reading through this and planning all this that I thought would happen. And then I was like, oh, right. Because I was looking at this very, two dimensionally, like it's going to be filmed. There it is. And I'm like, oh no, it's there's going to be people there. But I think people are going to connect to it because almost all of the stories have some piece that really hits on something everybody has either experienced or know someone who has experienced, which I think is this playwright's real strength in this piece, is that he figured out how to write some stories that like everybody would kind of identify with in one way or another. And um, I'm very excited to see what audiences think. The uh, we'll see. I mean, we've sold tickets so far, but I don't know how many. I'm always curious as to how many people are coming to live theater right now. With,
yeah.
I know that the city's mandated that you have to show a vaccination card now to get in, and mask, which I think is. I'm perfectly willing to do that to see live theater. So it's a little bit of an experiment to see like what happens, but I think it's totally worth it, and I am looking forward to seeing some theater live again in whatever way that manifests or whatever way I need to do it because I've definitely felt that void even with all the Zoom theater and all the the stuff we've done. I've definitely it's been a long intermission.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so interesting because it's not something that we could ever get used to either. You
Yep.
know, even when everything is in full swing, we always think intermission's not long enough, and this intermission was long enough. Even though we figured out how to make peace with it, it was still like, but this intermission is run too long. There's no line at the ladies,
Yep.
and
Everybody's taking
we're
a break. We all got cookies. We're fine.
yeah, no one's even talking anymore. Everyone's sitting and they're just patiently waiting for Act 2 to start.
That's all.
Ah, man. So these monologues, they talk about love, disappointment, and transgression. And when I saw that in the description, I was just thinking about the last, like, I guess it's kind of safe to say the last 2 years, really, of with those three themes in mind. You know, there have definitely been relationships that have been taken to task. You know, uh, during this moment, there's been a lot of disappointment. You expected to do one thing, and something else happens, and now the plans have changed, and the transgression, maybe we all can't tie ourselves to some transgression, but we are well aware of some transgression. One thing that comes to mind is a police car that was set on fire way early on. That made me think
Oh,
about some transgression and seeing how a moment like this can stir up so much anxiety and frustration. And it just reminds me of the value of theater and how coming back to this allows us to, one, make sense of this, and two, to just sort of cope
Mhm.
with it all. So I wanted to ask you, how did you make sense of this moment that we're in?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not 100% sure I have made full sense of it. I mean, like, I feel like every day I have a different thought about it, but, um, you know, really finding the joy and beauty in the things that I can, really helped. And, finding new ways to connect to people because, that was, I think, the hardest piece for me was that sort of disconnect. And, I'm maintained, I have lots of friends. I've always had friendships that I've considered, ongoing and there, but, you get busy and you drift and, people come in and out. But in this time, it was like I felt this urge to just reconnect and in whatever way that was, a phone call, a FaceTime, an email, just something to really keep the connections there, and that really seemed to help. Like, knowing that everybody was in this kind of all together, that I wasn't alone, that really helped me make sense of this moment, um, and, just seeing people sort of emerge on the other side in the ways that we have, even though, I mean, I know things are still very different and stuff is still happening. I I feel like we're all I feel closer to people. Does that make sense? But I
Mhm.
I I really do. I mean, I feel like we've all been through something. We've all been through this thing together and are continuing to go through it, but together we, without sounding like cliche, are stronger and can it helps. I don't know if that
Yeah.
answers your question, but that's
Yeah. I think about social media and how, before we were prying into people's lives, in social media, but we were I would like to think that we were a little bit more intently focused on people's lives now that we were so far away from them. Like the simple thing of being able to see people in the lobby of theater and know that they're alive, they're breathing, they're in great spirits because they're here. But then not being able to see them, it was like such a surprise when I would get messages on the various social channels from theater colleagues, that were not looking for me for the normal things they look for me for, but in general just had a question. And it was like you couldn't just give the answer without saying, "So how you doing?
Mhm.
How are things going?" Like really checking in because we didn't have that luxury that we had before in those lobbies.
I agree.
And I
I think about all the times I would run into you in in
Mhm.
those lobbies. Like, I was like, I think one of the last shows I saw might have been the Tribe of Fools Cabaret, before
Yeah.
the pandemic, and I was like and I remember seeing you there, and it was like, or the, um, oh, yeah, I feel like I've run into you most. But it's, yeah, I understand completely, you're right. I hadn't really thought about that, but yeah.
Yeah. So these 10 monologues, is there one or a few that speak to you more than others?
Yes. There are, I I for different reasons. I love there's one called, "I Was Right About Everything," and this one speaks to me because it's this guy who thinks he's so in love with this girl he's been flirting with, and he's, why isn't she into him? And then so he basically tells her, like, "This is it. You've had your chance. You're missing out on me. I'm the best. I'm everything." And through this sort of flirtatious conversation, he comes to the realization that, you know what? if you are too dense to realize what you're missing out on here, that like, I don't need you. There's this whole world out here. There's this whole other thing, and I'm not going to waste my time. I'm going to go, check out the world. You're missing out, but I'm going to do this. And there's just something about it, and it's told very humorously. I mean,
Mm.
that's a very short abridged version of what happens in it. It's quite hilarious. But and I've always just thought that one was so good and really resonated with me. Um, the other one that I really like seems silly, but it's called Artificial Leg, and it's about a person who buys a house and finds an artificial leg in the basement. And this person's retelling this story, like, this time I found an artificial leg, and it's absolutely hysterical. And why it resonates with me is because we all have that one really silly story that you tell at a party where you're like, "Oh my god, you're not gonna believe this thing that happened to me, but this thing happened to me." And you tell it in this, like, really dramatic, hilarious way that
Yeah.
every time you tell it, you're cracking up and you can barely get through it without laughing. And he wrote this piece just like that. Like, that's what it is. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, no, that's the one." Like, um, and then the last one I'll mention, it doesn't really resonate with me because I, have a wonderful husband and family, and, being locked down together was not at all painful. I mean, beyond being away from friends, but, it was nice to be together. But there's one called Lockdown, and that one is the woman that I'm filming in the closet, because she's just like, she isn't in love with her husband, and she is locked down with him, and she's got this sort of lover that she hasn't seen in forever, and she's talking to him on the phone, and it's this whole, but the things she says, the moments, she kind of goes through this whole roller coaster of emotions, and it's almost like he wrote in every emotion you could have experienced during the lockdown at some point in
Mm.
this monologue. And I was like, "Oh yeah." So like, that's why I said, is like, everyone will identify with some piece of it. They're gonna be like, "Oh, I remember that moment." Like, the only thing he doesn't talk about is baking bread. If he had thrown in a bunch of bacon bread, it would have ticked all the boxes of what happened during the first, month of lockdown.
Should message John Patrick Shanley. You forgot about sourdough.
Right. You said nothing about
You
sourdough starter.
didn't
I traveled
you
all the
didn't
way to
make a sourdough, it didn't happen.
I traveled all the way to Lancaster to get, yeast. There was a yeast shortage in Northwest Philadelphia for, like, a week, and we had to drop off somebody near Lancaster, and I said, "Great, we're going to a grocery store out there because they've gotta have yeast. It's Lancaster."
Yes.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Every time I made bread, that was the question. It wasn't even about this is a great loaf. It was like, where did you get yeast?
Yep. Where in the world did you find yeast?
I got lucky. I got one of those like wholesale bags of yeast from the wholesale place, and I didn't look back.
There you go.
But yeah, so there it is. Um, so tell us how we can experience Rogues Gallery.
Yes. So, you can experience it virtually if you would like to watch it on, your screen. It is, through Fringe, they're selling the virtual tickets. It's the first weekend, so it's the 24th, 25th, and 26th. You can watch it anytime those 3 dates with your virtual ticket. It runs about an hour and 20 minutes start to finish, which is great. And then if you'd like to come and see it in person, we have performances starting September 30th. So it's the 30th, the 1st, October 1st, and 2nd, which I know is a Saturday. That's a matinee because Chestnut Hill's having a festival on October 3rd, so there's no October 3rd. But then we're also, the following week, outside of Fringe, we have performances on the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th as well. So if you miss us at Fringe, but the Fringe shows are the goodies and the early ones. So get your tickets through Fringe Arts. We are Rogues Gallery.
Great. And I'll have those links in the show notes, of course.
Great. Thank you.
Mariangela, it is always a pleasure to talk to you and to run into you. I'll say hello to Chris if
Yes.
you haven't talked to him in a while. I'm so glad that you're out there and you're doing okay. and that you are bringing something to the stage for the Fringe. So thank you for taking the time to chat with me. And again, that's Rogues Gallery. It's presented by the Stagecrafters Theater, September 24th through October 2nd. And we'll have those links in there and that information. It's sort of a hybrid. It's hybrid benefits. I actually like this. I feel like the virtual element gives you a sense, a little bit of time, kind of. It sort of gives you, I look at it like the previews, but it's just as quality, it's just a different experience. So you can experience it virtually, you can experience it live, but just experience it. Come join us in the theaters again. Uh, 2021 Fringe Arts. Mariangela Saavedra, thank you so much
Oh,
for taking the time to chat with me. It was
thank
truly a pleasure.
thank
It's
you,
always
Jenna.
a
Always
pleasure.
a pleasure to talk to you. Always. It's so good. I look forward to running into you in the lobby. Thank you again so much.
Absolutely, because I've missed that very much to see you in the lobby again.
Rep Radio is an Emory production. You can find Rep Radio on social media at Rep Radio on Facebook, at Rep_radio on Instagram and Twitter. For more information, visit us online at em3ry.com. Ride with us. Emory is on the move.